everyone, welcome to World Insight with Tian coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang pays a visit to Germany and Belgium seeking support for an open global economy on the 45th year of diplomatic ties with Berlin. And I go up close and personal with Australian author Thomas Keneally on the inspiration and effort that went into writing the book Schindlers Ark, the basis of critically acclaimed film Schindler's List. We start from Europe, where Chinese Premier Li Keqiang makes the rounds in Germany and Belgium from Wednesday to Friday. This year marks the 45th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and Germany, and China hopes to find an ally in Europe's biggest economy and the European Union capital to push for free trade, open investment, as well as global and regional peace and stability.
Strengthening mutual trust. That's the mission of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, who's left Beijing for Germany on a 3-day trip through Europe. There, Li will meet with German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and attend an annual meeting with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. During this visit, Chinese Premier will not only meet old friends, but also talk about business and cooperation with them. Li and Merkel will also attend the China-Germany Innovation Forum. Since 2004, the EU has been China's biggest trading partner. And in turn, China has been the EU's second-largest trading partner for some time now. Last year, China became Germany's biggest trading partner. However, relations between China and the EU are not without friction.
If the EU can fulfill its promise in the early date, it will not only set up a constructive image of responsibility that EU member states and the EU keep their promises and obey rules, but also sends a positive signal that EU will work with China to maintain a free and open multilateral trading system. We hope that EU can implement fully Article 15 as soon as possible. We also welcome Germany to continue playing a positive role in this regard.
15 years ago, China joined the WTO, looking forward to the day that its market economy status would be admitted. However, up until last year, the EU still refused to recognize China's market economy status. So, amid the current rise in trade protectionism, Li Keqiang, together with the EU, is expected to voice a common stand in safeguarding the world's free trade system and promoting economic globalization, a way of sending positive energy to the world.
For more on China's tie with Germany and the European Union, we have here in our Beijing studio two guests, Wang Yiwei, who is the director of the Institute of International Affairs at Renmin University, focusing his research on European studies and also Belt and Road Initiative. Welcome to our program, Professor. Also joining us here for the very first time here in Beijing studio, Matt Harborne, who is the new president of the European Chamber of Commerce here in China. Welcome.
Thank you.
I want to start with you, Mr. Harborne. Cut short the diplomatic expressions. What exactly is Europe trying to achieve this time when having a high-level discussion with China?
Well, I think Europe would like to see that China goes from rhetorics to action. We and the member companies of our chamber, we have felt that China has raised expectations for us. We talked about the G20, we have the Davos speech, we had document number 5 from the State Council, and the openness expressed during the BRI summit. Now we would like to see that translated into some real action. So actually we are hoping that the two sides will commit to advancing the comprehensive agreement on investment.
Rhetorics to action, isn't that also the hope from China, I guess, toward the European Union and Germany as well?
Of course, we also would like to Germany and the European Union more welcome Chinese investment, also more China market access, and so of course this is both sides. I hope a new reality. I think to the China-EU cooperation now go beyond the bilateral meaning, push forward the globalization, global governance. I think this is also new hopes for both sides.
All right, if both of you gentlemen say so, let's get down to work. The first thing that we need to look at is the general background of everything that is right here with us. First of all, G7 summit. It did not conclude with much success. According to Chancellor Merkel from Germany, talking about Europe has to find its own independence. Apart from the US, and also apart from the UK, which is looking at Brexit right now. But it is harder said than done, I guess, Mr. Harborn.
Yes, but perhaps out of this situation comes a new reality for Europe. Maybe this will make
Not
Europe...
maybe, it is already
No,
the new
I was going to say
reality,
that I think Europe may now have a chance to become more unified internally, because now Europe really matters. Europe matters inside of Europe, and Europe matters in the world. And actually now Europe and China relation also matters.
Does that provide more momentum to develop further relations and more in-depth relations with China from your perspective, Mr. Harborn?
Yes, it does. And if China also wants that, I think we have a very good opportunity.
Good opportunity or not? We're not, of course, Professor Wang, as you are a scholar of international relations, talking about zero-sum games. If somebody getting closer to the United States or the UK, that it must be against China. That is not going to be the nature of our relations these days. Just to be complicated, it more than that. But Professor Wang, what kind of opportunity does that present China with? With much action, will things ever be changed toward a very different thing as we are having right now?
Well, I think China-EU cooperations now maybe more be expected because of the President Trump, who want to quit in the climate change, even idea, and also globalization. So China and EU are the most supportive of the global governance, multilateralism, and globalization. Of course, there are different approaches of the globalization. The European side may be more rule-based. China's side, I think, is more development-oriented. So this would also have some confrontation of the Belt and Road Initiative, the summit. But as a new potential corporations, like I think like e-commerce, and also about the service trade, so I think China-EU still has a long, a complementary list of corporations in the future.
Professor Wang, you have to explain yourself. Why is it apparently so-called rule-based approach and a development-oriented approach could be quote-unquote controversial when they are being combined together?
Yes, for example, China-European Union, the bilateral investment treaty negotiation may be dealt with many labor rights, human rights, public procurement. This is European standard, very high. But China, we are said, we are a developing country. Right. But the EU side consider China as not just a developing country, maybe it's a challenger and more competitive competition from the Chinese side. So this is I think it's asymmetric relations, but the European side focuses on the reciprocity and then make some confrontations.
Mr. Harborn is ready to explain that.
Yeah, no, but I think China has had 15 years since, no, 16 years since its accession to WTO to become a more...
But you are not recognized Chinese market economy.
That's a political issue. Yeah, that's a political issue. But I think now is the time really to go towards more rules because we are working now in a global area where we need the same rules to function. And we believe that China has the opportunity to take a leadership in a multipolar world. It's basically US, Europe, and
work together with the European Union.
Yes, and together, and therefore we need to have some common rules, and that is the point of Europe. And I think if we do this now, the upside is so tremendous. Actually, we talked about the asymmetrical relationship. Look at the investments between China and Europe. Right now, Europe is investing much less than China, and I think that is not the way it should be. If we compare the Chinese economy to the size of the US economy, of course the foreign investments into China should be much bigger than what they are today. But that will come when there is more market access and rules that foreign companies feel comfortable with and safe and secure.
I guess the spotlight is really on these two gentlemen together while we are talking about this. You know, I have to let Professor Wang to go a little bit further about what Mr. Harborn just said. You know, one thing is rule-based should be the fundamental of the relations between so-called EU and Germany's relations with China, or actually it has to be, as what you said, some specific barometers. For example, recognition of China as the market economy, recognition of China as an important player on the international stage, and therefore China exercise its own capabilities in different fields. Which comes first? Is there a sequence here?
Well, Chinese mentality, we say, is seek the truth from the facts. The facts that China and the world is very diverse, it's very dynamic, developing. You cannot have the single high standard like TPP. Why failed? Because of high standard, exclusive. So we should learn from that lessons from the United States. That China-EU cooperation is more focused on the reality, not too much a high standard.
May I bring it down to perhaps a lower level? I think the promise made at the third plenum that China should allow the market forces to play a decisive role in resource allocation. For that to happen, there needs to be a level playing field. And for a level playing field to function, there needs to be a common set of rules.
Right. I think that's we're talking about different things. First of all, we should talk about from the perspective of our own, which is, according to what you have done, how much you're contributing to the overall relations of the development for China and EU relations and China-Germany relations. So, Mr. Harborn, I understand your point. According to China's third plenum, for its own purposes, China needs to open its market. But from the EU's perspective, what has been done over the past, let's just say, 1 or 2 years, since things are beginning to change in the world, that it is helping with the momentum of China-EU relations?
Well, I think Europe has said all along that
said is one thing. What has been in actual term done?
We have been deeply involved in the negotiations for a bilateral investment treaty, and this is a very important basis for our future cooperation. The other thing that has caused problems is then when we had trade friction caused by overcapacity sold in Europe and causing disruptions to European markets. This is not helping politically, and that is also something Europe has tried to explain.
Mr. Wang, what about what China has done over the past 1 or 2 years to contribute with the momentum of the bilateral relations?
We have the overall reform. I think this will make remarkable achievements.
What kind of reform you're talking about, Professor
Like
Wang?
anti-corruption, like reform of state-owned enterprises. And as I said, they made the market take a decisive role. I think huge progress. But the EU side is, still not satisfied because the EU side fails many competition, not only from the United States, Japan, but also domestic Chinese enterprise. That makes the purpose.
Is that competition normal according to you, Professor Wang?
Of course, it's normal because China, market economy. You should, according to the WTO rule, welcome competition.
Mr. Harper.
I want to give credit here because today we launched our business confidence survey and we asked our members what they think about reform in China.
Your members mainly are German companies and European companies?
No, European companies.
Yeah, European companies.
Yes, and they say that when it comes down to corruption, they're very happy about the progress in China. The issues that remain are on the regulatory side, where our member companies want to see more progress.
All right.
But the problem is you encourage the rule of law, but the three laws that China passed, you're against. Like the law on the NGO, the law of the internet, the law on the anti-terrorism. But you should support China's rule of law. But the European side definitely openly against that the law. This makes the Chinese government confused.
We are in favor, but it's sometimes when it happens in a way where we don't fully understand if we are treated the same or if we are discriminated against. That's when we speak up.
Okay, we have to make it a pause for this point. But what about the other point? We have seen some tremendous growth of trade between China and the European countries. In fact, China has already become the largest trading partner for the EU countries as a whole, and also largest trading partner for Germany, where you, sir, are originally coming from, and where the Chinese premier is landing for the very first stop here this time. So, but others argue mercantilism is not necessarily going to solve all the problems or the challenges ahead. What do you make, Mr. Harborn, of the role trade still plays this time in the relations between China and the EU, given the fact that we earlier talked about the overall change of the international relations structure?
Well, the continued openness of international trade is tremendously important. I mean, if we are to achieve solutions to the problems in the future, and be it the environmental problems or going up the value chain, it requires trade and integration into global supply chains. So, I mean, this is a given, I think.
But having said that, though, what can be done about trade? I mean, we cannot just rely on all the previous practices to wish them could prosper in the future and give us more momentum, but rather some new mechanisms, new thoughts of thinking. For example, some would say, what about Belt and Road Initiative for the European companies? And what about other platforms, for example, within Asia, or among Asian countries, and yet European countries could also play a role? What do you make of this shall I say, what do you make of these different kinds of platforms that can be used?
Well, I think these are all working in the same direction, facilitators of trade, be it infrastructure as this great vision of the Belt and Road Initiative, or be it global convergence when it comes to standards and rules and regulations. These are important things to facilitate trade. So I think we're on the right track.
On the right track, how fast can it be? Of course, Chinese always talk about, let's do it overnight. That's not possible when you involve so many other players on the same stage. But yet, there is an efficiency and a purpose that we're talking about here.
Even about the multilateralism, China-EU cooperations, of course, is not just the bilateral, but it's also about the multilateral. But this is now the small multilateralism, also European Union should support, but not so support like the 16+1. The CEE countries, actually the economy, market economy.
Central European and also Eastern European
countries. Their economic growth much better than other places, particularly in South Europe. So now there's a new dynamic of the China-EU cooperations. Chinese government always highlights that our cooperations under the 16+1 framework.
That you have to explain once again for our audience.
Support of the China-EU relations, not that. But European side always, particularly Germany, views of the negatively that it's dividing the rule of Europe. Even the thing of building the new Great War within the European Union. But many need to understand about that.
Okay.
And also China-EU Euro Express, the train from the continental, also is the boom of our economy, particularly trade. It's also good.
All right.
Perhaps we are back to the issue of regulations. What Europe is saying is that we have our 10 initiative building a trans-European network for transport. We want that integrated with areas outside of Europe, but it has to follow the rules and the procedures that we have laid down in Europe. I think that is where the conflict area is, possibly.
The rules in Europe and also the cooperation in Europe are extremely important for the European countries. And yet we do understand it is also itself a multilateral platform, and therefore consensus has to be built among all the players because of the nature of the European Union, and eventually come up with momentum. But Mr. Harborn, the argument is, will that be on time? Well, you have other competitors from all over the world trying to grasp the same piece of pie. I guess that's not a question just for EU and China relations. It's a question for EU with any kinds of relations with the outside world.
Yeah,
I know you yourself cannot handle that issue alone, but
No.
I do want to ask from your opinion because you're a business leader here in China.
Yeah, the diversity of Europe is at the same time its strength. Then, of course, Europe, as we as the European Chamber, we say that Europe has to speak with one voice. Europe has to find a common policy ground in the important issues. This is important for us as business.
Okay,
Yes,
let
important.
Mr. Harborn continue, and please finish your point, sir.
No, that was my point, that we want Europe to speak with one language.
Okay,
This is
will
important.
China has the patience?
Of course, we always support the unification of the European Union, even more supportive than some member states of the European Union like UK, actually.
When the Chinese premier is already in Germany and to go to Brussels for a final discussion for this trip with the European Union, what do you think should be some of the pragmatic expectations, gentlemen, that we should have for this trip?
One, I think because last year, unfortunately, there's no joint statement of the 18th China-EU summit. This is very unusual because of the controversial on the Chinese overcapacity problem, that the European side are very concerned about steers and overcapacity.
Yeah, so your point is?
Now, so joint statement is very important to summarize the 2 years progress. The China-EU cooperations under the President Trump and under the current difficult situation, I think it's more and more significance push forward the globalization.
What do you expect should be in that document?
So two new, I think we should expect. Firstly, is about the China-EU cooperations over the sea, the blue year of the blue. So maritime cooperations, maritime Silk Road.
All right.
No, six
Second point.
European countries, they claim we are the destination of the 21st century maritime Silk Road. Italy, Holland, Germany, UK, Denmark, and
All right.
Norway.
Second
Good.
point?
Second one is, I think, the service trade and e-commerce. I think the new high for the China-EU trade
It
relations.
is not fair. Only let Professor Wang to give a conclusion. Always we go to you as well, Mr. Harborn.
I hope that a strong commitment to an early conclusion of the comprehensive agreement on investment will be one point. The other point, which is really important in the view of the US, is that we firmly commit to the Paris Climate Accord. This is very important. These two things I hope to see.
Climate change.
Climate change.
After President Trump, yes.
We are looking forward to that, gentlemen. Meanwhile, I want to thank the two of you. With the discussion that you just had, it totally makes sense to have further discussion at even higher level between the officials of China and the European Union to work things out. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Matt Harborn, Wang Yiwei. Appreciate it. Thanks. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei on CGTN. Still to come on our program, we revisit the life and times of a Nazi anti-hero in Schindlers Ark, written by Booker Prize-winning author Thomas Keneally. His inspiration for the book in the full interview right after this. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Next, we bring back a piece of World War II history. A Nazi Party member turned into an unlikely hero by saving 1,200 Jews all over Poland and Germany from concentration camps. That's written into the work of historical fiction, Schindlers Ark. And it was later adapted into the highly successful film, Schindler's List. Earlier, I sat down with the author, Booker Prize winner, Australian novelist Thomas Keneally, and he shared with me what inspired him to write the story. But before our interview, let's take a look at this.
In 1993, the American historical film Schindler's List did the rounds of world movie festivals. With 7 Oscars, 7 BAFTAs and 3 Golden Globes, it first introduced to a wild audience the name of Oskar Schindler, a German businessman, a Nazi party member, war profiteer, yet also a man who saved over 1,100 Jews from concentration camps during the Holocaust. The movie was based on the novel Schindlers Ark, written by Australian author Thomas Keneally, who is neither German nor Jewish. Mr. Keneally got to know Schindler's story from Leopold Page, one of the survivors in Schindler's factory. Page made it his life mission to tell the story of Schindler, and Keneally helped him to fulfill it. When the famous Jewish-American director Steven Spielberg first read the novel, he was unsure if he was ready to make a film about the Holocaust. But finally he made up his mind to tell the story of how the Jews suffered through the eyes of an unlikely good Samaritan, Oskar Schindler, who proved to be righteous.
I could have gotten Oskar, there are 1,100 people who are alive because of you. Look at them. If I'd made more money.
What was it like for you as a writer to go through that process?
Well, I thought it would be easier than it was. But the point is that the build-up of detail about the barbarity of humans lives with you all the time because you're obsessed with it. You think just like a journalist thinks, I can get in, get the story, and get out. But it doesn't always happen. It stays with you. And I can remember having a very dark time in the middle of the book. But my dark time was nothing like the dark time the former prisoners had had.
How long was the dark time?
A month. It happens to a lot of writers that they have a crisis in the middle of their book. And in the middle of their book, they can lose faith in what they're doing. And that's terrible because it takes so long to get to that point.
So actually you got 2 crises going on. One is the writer's crisis in the middle of the book. And the other is the emotional crisis because you have to you really melt yourself into these stories before you can put them onto the paper.
People had died to make this story. Schindler saved a small number, but people had died as part of this story, and I couldn't forget that and couldn't fail to be haunted by it.
How did you struggle against yourself in order to get out of that trap?
Well, I lived in Sydney on a beach, a surfing beach. So I would go to the beach, a long way from Europe. I would go to football matches. I would go to restaurants and drink wine. So gradually, after a couple of weeks, you begin to feel better about it. You get your strength and you get your psychological strength and your courage back.
So namely, Australia helps you. The great outdoor and the great wine.
Absolutely. Writing it in the New World instead of in the Old World where it happened was a great help.
Movies about wars usually could fall into a trap. Good men versus bad men. Good people versus bad people. But in your book, I find it a bit more complicated than that. I
should disclaim that I ever spoke to Schindler. If I'd had a chance to talk to him, I know I would have liked him because the stories were about him being a good guy, relaxed, a man who had no money at that stage of his life, but who always over-tipped, a man who had no money but could always find the money to buy another cognac. I'm sure I would have liked him. He, like I, was a Catholic. And were not the sort of Catholics bishops would have approved of. And so I liked the fact that he was a Catholic. On top of that, he was flawed. I wouldn't have to be reverent to him because he was a bad husband. He used people as cheap labor.
Yes, because that's why he wanted to have these people originally. And
he always wanted to be rich. He always intended he'd make a killing out of the war. And at the end of the war, he lost everything, of course. And after the war, he couldn't get back into being wealthy because he didn't have those Jewish engineers who were his prisoners and the Jewish accountants to look after him. So it's a great contradiction, a man who can only succeed when society's turned upside down and can chiefly succeed when he has help from his prisoners, at the same time respects the humanity of his prisoners. And he, at the end of the film and of the book, his prison was full. Now, when I say that mention the film, that's one of my small criticisms about the film. I think the film is a fine film. But at the end of the film, he says, if I'd sold this badge, I could have saved one more. If I'd sold the car, I could have saved 10 more. In fact, his camp was already very full. While wanting to be sincerely rich, he had an amiable regard for the humanity of these other people. He knew that they were his brothers in the human race, as simple as that. At the same time as being a black marketeer, a scoundrel, and a great, he could confuse officials. He could bombard them with documentation, he could bribe them with diamonds, as he does in the film and does even more in the book. And he was an extraordinarily confident man.
So the question really is, what is this really about? Is this about bigger cause, or this is about the bottom line of human instinct?
Yes, it's interesting that you can indoctrinate people to hate other people, and the indoctrination is often successful with quite intelligent people. Oskar was a boy from the country. And yet he's
an outlier in a way. He's
yeah,
almost like an outlier in a way.
Yes, indeed. He is too much of a rebel to be influenced by the conditioning that says to the children and to adolescents and to others, you must hate this group because they're a danger to your civilization. And they're not human anyhow. So you don't have to, they're louse. You don't have to worry about killing them off. It's interesting that he evaded that, that conditioning. And in any case, he was a part of the book that he was an agent of German military intelligence as well. So he was spying for them on the SS, and that was an interesting part of his. But when the film was made and Spielberg cut it down, it was 6.5 hours long, and then he cut it down to 3.25. So he did a good job to get it down to 3.25. But he had to just concentrate on this idea of rescue and ambiguity. What I liked about Spielberg, who should I be to say, why should I be the one to say that when he's a far more famous director than I am a writer? But the truth is that I respected his taste for showing in the film just how mixed Oscar's motives were, just how ambiguous he was.
Mr. Keneally, what is it like for you? I mean, as a writer, the book was big.
Yes.
You won a Booker Prize for it. Then it was getting even bigger because of the movie. But you know, the book itself was about the worst nature of human being. The book itself is about hundreds of thousands of deaths during the war and the uncertainty of human nature for the future. How do you read so many messages all at the same time personally?
I was raised a Catholic. I don't think I'm a Catholic anymore, but we were told that we had original sin, that we were born imperfect. And that imperfection, that struggle between reason and brutalism, brutal reactions, that we're given our reason to try to control. That struggle has just always fascinated me from childhood, in myself too. One of the reasons I wanted to write that book was to ask myself, how would I have behaved in that situation?
How did you think?
Am I confident that I wouldn't, under the orders of my officers and under the conditioning of a young lifetime, do what they did? And I'm scared that I don't know the answer. I'm scared that I might. And so I deliberately set out to pluck those strands out, because, as you say, people had died in great numbers, and they deserved that their deaths shouldn't be written off simply, that the full complexity of both death and survival, and of goodness and malice. And the prisoners told me this. The prisoners said, whenever we met Schindler after the war, we would ask him why he did it. And it depended on the day. He'd say one thing, then in a couple of days' time he'd completely contradict himself, then he'd say something again the following week, and so on. Every time they asked him that question, Poldek said it was a different answer.
It was decades ago when you wrote the book.
Yes. I was young. I had a little bit of hair.
And now, very different. Decades later, you learn life much more than you did then, I guess.
Yes.
And you go through this huge fame, a lot of spotlights as a result of it. You are now much more matured, shall I say,
Yes.
than you used to be. When you reflect upon what you wrote and this man, have things changed in your mind?
No, in fact, it's interesting. The thing that always worried me is that despite all the evidence for the story I told, ultimately someone would come along with another story and say, no, he got it all wrong. This is, Schindler's had a third motive for, and that hasn't happened. Now, Mrs. Schindler...
Were you scared about that possibility?
I was scared about that possibility. Mrs. Schindler said at the time that she was never consulted, but she was, both by myself and by Spielberg, exhaustively. But the point was that she was his abandoned wife. She was in an interesting position. A man who's left you suddenly becomes a hero to the world and a byword for goodwill to other humans.
That's right.
And he didn't show you much goodwill. And so she was angry with, I think, with the fact that her husband has become a famous man and a byword for human sensitivity, human kindness. And but her story is part of the fascination of the story for an outsider, because her story of him is very ambiguous. And a lot of people said when it came to feeding women by hand, sick women by hand, she was the one who'd do that in the camp. Oskar was too busy drinking and talking and, you know, doing big stuff.
It's a very interesting man, isn't it?
Yes, he is. And I don't think he was a philosopher or a saint, you see. If he'd been a saint, he could only have died with those people. He couldn't have saved them.
But the question is, has there ever been a saint?
Well, that's a good question to ask an old Catholic. Possibly not. There've always been, we have always been, there have been men and women who know themselves and try to, and because they know themselves, they're kind to others. And that is a great thing. It's a wonder we're not all killers, because we're pretty savage animals, but we're not. We can sit together and talk. And I would hate to think of you starving. I would bring you food.
Because that's your moral bottom line.
Yes, but if I was shot for bringing you food, would I still bring you the food? That's the acid test.
All interesting questions to be raised. You love history.
Yes, indeed. I've written a lot of history.
Some say history is only the version of story that the winners wants to tell.
Ah, yes, but novelists tell about history so they can tell the true story from the point of view of ordinary people. So novelists are great subversives. It is true the victors tell the story, but some events are so huge and there's so much documentation for them that you can't escape them.
So actually, who is writing fictions? The writers, the novelists, or the historians?
Well, I think we're both writing, but historians do more research. I've written history too, and you can't escape the person you are when you write history. So it's as if if you wrote a history and I wrote a history, it's like having a big massive dough called history and some cookie cutters. You have those in China, don't you?
We do.
And you're one cookie cutter, and you cut your cookie out of that massive dough, and I'm a different cookie cutter. You're shaped like a diamond, I'm shaped like a spade, and so my version of that dough will be different from your version.
History needs a lot of missionaries who can really talk.
Yes.
about at least what they saw ever happened.
Yes, and may they continue to come. I can't wait for the novels of a new generation of Chinese writers.
Mr. Keneally, what a pleasure.
Thank
you once again
very
for sharing
much.
your precious time.
Thank you.
That's Thomas Keneally, author of the book Schindlers Ark. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, you can try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo as well. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on World Insight with Tian Wei team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.